The rope burned into his neck as they hauled him toward the hanging tree, but Elias Crowe wasn't ready to die. Not for his land. Not for their lies. The vigilantes called it justice, but he knew the truth. They wanted Iron Mesa Ranch, and dead men don't argue about deeds. When the noose snapped and he hit the ground gasping, one thought kept him alive. Find someone who won't run when the guns come out. That's when a stranger named Colt Varren rode into Red Hollow, trailing ghosts of his own. 2 men, 1 valley, and a war that would decide whether courage or greed writes the future. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The desert didn't forgive mistakes. Colt Varren learned that truth young, and the years since had only carved it deeper into his bones. He rode through the Badlands with his hat pulled low, the brim casting shadow over eyes that had seen too much killing and not enough justice. The sun hammered down on red stone and sage, turning the air into something you had to chew before breathing. His horse, a steel-gray Mustang named Ash, moved steady beneath him, hooves crunching over gravel that hadn't felt rain in months. Behind him, 3 days back, lay the grave of a man who'd tried to shoot him in the back. Ahead, somewhere in the haze, was the name he'd been chasing for 2 years, Deke Holloway. The man who'd murdered Colt's brother over a card game in Silver Bend and disappeared into the frontier before the law could blink. Colt wasn't law. He was the reckoning that came after law gave up. He crested a ridge and saw smoke rising thin and gray against the sky. Not campfire smoke, too much of it, too scattered. Something was burning, and not on purpose. He touched his heels to Ash's flanks and picked up the pace, scanning the valley below. What he found was a town that looked like it had been holding its breath for years. Red Hollow sat in a basin between 2 ranges of mountains, the kind of place that should have been thriving. Good water, timber, grassland that stretched for miles. But the streets were quiet in a way that felt wrong. No kids running, no women chatting outside the general store. Just men standing in doorways, watching, like they were waiting for something bad to happen and didn't know when it would arrive. Colt rode down the main street slowly, eyes moving. The saloon, the land office, the blacksmith's forge, cold, a newspaper office with the windows boarded up. And at the end of the street, a doctor's shingle hanging crooked above a door that stood half open. He dismounted, tied Ash to the rail, and stepped inside. The doctor was a lean man with silver hair and hands that shook just enough to notice. He looked up from washing blood off his fingers and said, "If you're here to finish the job, get it over with. I'm too tired to beg." "I'm not here to finish anything," Colt said. "What happened?" The doctor studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward the back room. "See for yourself." Colt walked through the curtain and stopped. A man lay on the table, his neck wrapped in bandages that were already soaking through. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, and his breathing came in shallow, ragged pulls. But he was alive. Barely. "They hanged him," the doctor said quietly from behind. Rope snapped. Pure luck. He hit the ground hard enough to crack 2 ribs, but the noose didn't crush his windpipe. Another inch of drop, and he'd be dead. Colt looked at the man's hands, calloused, scarred, the hands of someone who worked land, not just owned it. "Who is he?" "Elias Crowe. Owns Iron Mesa Ranch, about 15 miles northeast. Biggest spread in the valley." The doctor's voice turned bitter. "Also the biggest target." "Why'd they hang him?" "Because he wouldn't sell. Because he told them to go to hell when they tried to run him off his own land. Because Silas Red decided Iron Mesa was worth more than Elias's life." Colt's jaw tightened. Silas Red? Man who runs this valley now, or thinks he does, came in 6 months ago with money, smooth talk, and just enough hired guns to make people nervous. Started buying up claims, pressuring folks to sell cheap. Anyone who said no. The doctor trailed off, nodding toward Elias. "This is what happens." Colt turned back to the man on the table. Elias's good eye cracked open, bloodshot and fierce despite the pain. "You," Elias rasped. His voice was like gravel scraped over iron. "You're not from here." "No." "Good." Elias tried to sit up, failed, and settled for gripping the edge of the table. "I need someone who's not afraid of what's coming." "Take it easy," the doctor said, stepping forward. You're in no condition. I'm in exactly the condition I need to be, Elias cut him off. He locked eyes with Colt. You look like a man who knows which end of a gun to point. Am I right? Colt didn't answer right away. He'd spent the last 2 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation, getting tangled up in someone else's war. But something about the way Elias looked at him, like he was the last card in a losing hand, made him hesitate. I'm looking for someone, Colt said finally. Man named Deke Holloway. Heard he passed through here a few weeks back. Elias's eye flickered with recognition. Holloway. Yeah. He rode with Silas's crew for a while, left town 2 days ago, heading west toward the border. Colt's hand tightened on his belt. 2 days. Close. Too close to walk away from. But Elias wasn't done. You helped me, he said, his voice gaining strength, and I'll tell you exactly where Holloway's going. I know his kind, know where men like that run when they're trying to disappear. I don't hire out. I'm not asking you to. Elias coughed, winced, and kept going. I'm asking you to stop them from stealing everything I've built. Iron Mesa's not just land, it's water rights, timber contracts, grazing leases. If Silas takes it, he controls the whole valley. And once he does, every honest rancher, every farmer, every family trying to make a life here gets crushed. Colt looked at the doctor, who nodded slowly. He's not exaggerating. Silas has been consolidating power for months. Iron Mesa's the last big piece he doesn't own. Why doesn't the law step in? The doctor laughed, a short, bitter sound. What law? The marshal left 3 months ago. Said he didn't get paid enough to die for a town that wouldn't stand up for itself. And the folks here? He gestured toward the window. They're so scared of Silas's men, they won't even testify to what they've seen. It's not cowardice, it's survival. You speak up, you end up like Elias. Or worse. Colt turned back to Elias. You've got ranch hands, why not use them? Dead or run off, Elias said flatly. Silas sent men to my place a week ago. Burned the bunkhouse, shot my foreman. The few hands I had left scattered. Can't blame them. They signed on to herd cattle, not fight a war. Silence settled over the room, heavy and expectant. Colt walked to the window and looked out at the street. Red Hollow was dying. Not from drought or disease, but from fear. And fear, left unchecked, was a poison that spread faster than wildfire. He thought about his brother, about Deke Holloway, about the fact that revenge was supposed to be simple. Find the man, make him pay, move on. But life had a way of complicating things. If I do this, Colt said slowly, I do it my way. No rules. No mercy for men who've already shown they don't give any. Elias's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. That's exactly what I need. And when it's done, you tell me where Holloway's going. No games. Deal. Colt turned back to face him. What's your offer? Elias hesitated, then said, room and board at the ranch. Whatever supplies you need. And he paused, his expression hardening. Half of Iron Mesa. The doctor's head snapped up. Elias, I mean it, Elias said. I've got no family, no heirs. If I die, Silas takes it all anyway. But if you keep me alive long enough to make this legal, you'll own half the best land in the valley. You can sell it, work it, or burn it for all I care. But it'll be yours. Colt stared at him. It was a hell of an offer, the kind men killed for, which meant it came with a hell of a price. Why me? Colt asked. You don't know me. Don't know if I'll run the first time bullets start flying. Elias met his gaze without flinching. Because you're still here. You could have walked out the moment I said Silas Red's name, but you didn't. That tells me you're either stupid or stubborn, and I'm betting on stubborn. Colt almost smiled. Almost. When do we leave? He asked. Now, Elias said. Silas's men know I'm alive. They'll come to finish the job. The doctor moved to protest, but Elias waved him off. Get me upright, Doc. I've been hurt worse. It took 10 minutes to get Elias on his feet, and another 5 to get him onto a horse the doctor borrowed from the stable. Colt watched the street the whole time, one hand resting easy on the grip of his Colt 45. No one approached, but he felt eyes on them, dozens of them, watching from windows and doorways, seeing everything and saying nothing. That was going to have to change. They rode out of Red Hollow as the sun dropped low, painting the valley in shades of copper and blood. Elias slumped in the saddle, staying upright through sheer stubbornness, while Colt kept his rifle across his lap and his eyes on the horizon. "Tell me about Silas," Colt said. Elias grunted. "Smart, dangerous. Not the kind of man who gets his hands dirty if he can help it. He's got a crew of maybe a dozen men, thugs mostly, but a few real guns mixed in. The worst is a man named Voss, cold-blooded killer. Fast, too. If Silas sends anyone after us, it'll be him." "What's Silas's angle? Why go to all this trouble for land?" "Because land is power out here," Elias said. "Control the water, control the ranches, control the ranches, control the supply lines, control the supply lines, and you own the valley. Silas isn't just building a cattle empire, he's building a kingdom, and he's using fear to do it." Colt's jaw tightened. He'd seen men like Silas before, men who thought power and money gave them the right to take whatever they wanted, men who hid behind words like progress and opportunity while crushing anyone who stood in their way. He hated men like that. They rode in silence for another hour before Elias spoke again. "You really think you can stop him?" Colt glanced at him. "I don't know, but I've learned that most bullies fold when someone finally punches back." Elias's mouth twitched. "Let's hope you're right." The ranch appeared as the last light faded, a sprawling spread of land tucked into the shadow of the mountains, with a main house, barn, and corrals that spoke of years of hard work. But the burned-out husk of the bunkhouse sat like a scar on the edge of the property, a reminder that this place had already bled. Colt helped Elias down from his horse and into the house. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood. There were no servants, no hands, no signs of life beyond the two of them. "You really are alone," Colt said. "For now," Elias replied. He sank into a chair by the fireplace and closed his eyes. "But word'll spread that you're here. That'll change things." "How?" "Because you're the first person in 6 months who didn't run." Colt walked to the window and looked out at the darkening land. Somewhere out there, Silas Red was planning his next move. And somewhere beyond that, Deke Holloway was running toward the border, thinking he'd gotten away clean. But neither of them knew what was coming. Colt Varren had made his choice. And when he made a choice, he saw it through, no matter how much blood it cost. The first attack came 3 nights later. Colt was asleep in the barn, his bedroll spread over loose hay, when Ash's whinny jolted him awake. He rolled to his feet, Colt 45 already in his hand, and moved to the door. 4 riders, maybe 5. Hard to tell in the moonlight, but their silhouettes were clear enough. Men with rifles, moving slow and deliberate toward the house. Colt's mind raced. Elias was inside, still weak, still healing. If they reached the house, he wouldn't stand a chance. So Colt didn't let them reach it. He stepped out of the barn, raised his pistol, and fired a single shot into the air. The riders froze. "That's far enough," Colt called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Turn around and ride out, or the next one goes through your chest." One of the riders laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Big talk for one man." "I only need to be one man if you're stupid enough to test me." The rider spurred his horse forward. Colt didn't hesitate. He fired, and the man jerked backward in the saddle, clutching his shoulder as his horse bolted. The others scattered, shouting curses, but Colt was already moving. He ducked behind the water trough, reloaded, and fired twice more. Not to kill, but to make them think twice about coming back. It worked. The riders retreated into the night, leaving their wounded companions stumbling after them on foot. Elias appeared in the doorway of the house, a shotgun in his hands. "They'll be back." "I know," Colt said, "but next time they'll bring more men." Elias nodded slowly. "Then we'd better be ready." Colt looked at him, this stubborn, half-dead rancher who refused to give up, and realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't just about finding Deke Holloway. It was about standing up when everyone else sat down, about choosing the hard fight because it was the right one. And Colt Varren had never been good at walking away from a fight. "Get some rest," Colt said. "Tomorrow, we start pushing back." Morning came cold and sharp, the kind of dawn that felt like a warning. Colt stood on the porch of the main house, coffee steaming in his tin cup, watching the valley wake up under a sky streaked with pink and gray. The mountains rose dark against the horizon, their peaks still holding snow even this late in the season. Beautiful country, the kind men died for. Behind him, the door creaked open and Elias emerged, moving slower than he wanted to but faster than he should. The bandages around his neck had been changed, fresh white against his weathered skin, but the bruising had spread down to his collarbone in shades of purple and green. "You should still be in bed," Colt said without turning around. "I'll rest when I'm dead," Elias replied, his voice rough but stronger than yesterday. "Which won't be today if I have anything to say about it." Colt handed him the coffee. Elias took it, sipped, and grimaced. "You make coffee like you're trying to strip paint. Keeps you awake. Or kills you faster." But Elias drank it anyway, standing beside Colt and looking out at the land. "We need to go into town." Colt raised an eyebrow. "That where you think we'll find friends?" "No," Elias said flatly. "That's where we find out who's left that's worth saving." They saddled up an hour later, Colt on Ash and Elias on a sturdy roan that seemed to understand its rider was hurting. The ride to Red Hollow took them across open grassland that should have been dotted with cattle, but stood empty except for circling hawks and the occasional jackrabbit. Elias's jaw tightened every time he looked at the emptiness. "Silas's men ran off about 200 head last month," he said. "Claimed they were strays. Sheriff didn't even bother investigating before he left town. Convenient. That's one word for it." As they approached Red Hollow, Colt noticed the same unnatural quiet he'd felt on his first ride in. Men watched from doorways but didn't wave. Women hurried their children inside when they spotted riders coming. The town wasn't just afraid, it was suffocating under the weight of its own silence. They tied their horses outside the land office, a squat building with peeling paint and windows so dirty you could barely see through them. Inside, a clerk sat behind a desk piled high with ledgers and maps, his spectacles sliding down his nose as he pretended not to notice them enter. "Morning, Henry," Elias said, his tone pleasant but carrying an edge. The clerk, Henry, looked up slowly, his face going pale when he recognized Elias. "Mr. Crowe, I heard you were... people said that I was dead," Elias finished. "Sorry to disappoint." Henry's eyes darted to Colt, then back to Elias. "What can I do for you?" "I need to file some papers," Elias said, pulling a folded document from his coat. "Legal transfer of property rights. Half of Iron Mesa Ranch to Colt Varren here, effective immediately." Henry's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "That's... Mr. Crowe, that's a significant transaction. Are you certain?" "Do I look uncertain?" The clerk swallowed hard and took the papers with shaking hands. He read through them twice, his eyes widening with each line, then looked up at Colt with something between fear and awe. "This will take a few days to process," Henry said carefully. "I'll need to verify the boundaries, check the water rights, make sure there are no existing liens." "There aren't," Elias interrupted. "I own that land free and clear, always have." "Of course, but the law requires..." "The law," a new voice said from the doorway, "is whatever Silas Red says it is these days." Colt turned to see a woman standing in the entrance, backlit by the morning sun. She was maybe 30, with the dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had the kind of sharpness that came from seeing too much and trusting too little. She wore a simple dress covered by a canvas coat, and her boots were scuffed from hard use. "Elena," Elias said, and there was warmth in his voice. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," she replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Her gaze swept over Elias's injuries, and her expression hardened. "They really tried to hang you." "They really failed." She turned to Colt, studying him with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock at auction. "And who are you?" "Colt Varren." "He's helping me," Elias added. "And before you ask, yes, I trust him." Elena's mouth twitched, almost a smile but not quite. Coming from a man who trusted Silas Red's promises 6 months ago, that's not exactly reassuring. Elias had the grace to look embarrassed. "I made a mistake. I'm correcting it." Elena crossed her arms, her attention still on Colt. "What's your angle, Mr. Varren? You don't look like the charitable type." "I'm not," Colt said evenly. "I'm the type who doesn't like bullies. Then you're going to hate it here. She glanced at Henry, who was pretending very hard to be absorbed in his paperwork. You filing that transfer, Henry, or just reading it for entertainment? I'm filing it, Henry said quickly. Just need Mr. Varren's signature. Colt stepped forward and signed where Henry indicated. The clerk blotted the ink, stamped the document, and filed it in a drawer that he locked immediately, as if afraid someone might steal it. There, Henry said. It's official, pending verification, of course. Of course, Elias said dryly. Come on, Colt. Let's get some breakfast. They left the land office with Elena falling into step beside them. Colt noticed she walked like someone used to watching her back, her hand never straying far from the small pistol tucked into her coat pocket. You're Edgar Cade's daughter, Elias said as they walked. How's your father doing? Elena's face went cold. He's dead. Elias stopped in his tracks. When? 2 weeks ago. Found him in his office at the newspaper. Official story is his heart gave out. She looked at Elias with eyes that burned. Unofficial story is someone put a pillow over his face while he slept at his desk. Colt's hand moved instinctively toward his pistol. Any proof? Not the kind that holds up when the only witness is too scared to talk, Elena said. But my father was writing an editorial about Silas Redd's land acquisitions, about how the deeds didn't match the sales, how people were signing over property under duress. He told me he had proof. Documents, ledgers, testimony. Then he died, and everything disappeared. Did you go to the law? Colt asked, though he already knew the answer. Elena laughed, bitter and sharp. What law? The marshal's gone. The mayor's in Silas's pocket. The judge comes through once a month and rules however Silas tells him to. She shook her head. My father believed in justice, Mr. Varren. He thought the truth mattered. That's what got him killed. They reached the cafe, a small establishment that smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee. Inside, a handful of men sat at scattered tables, their conversations dying the moment Elias walked in. Colt felt the weight of their stares, some curious, some hostile, all wary. They took a table in the corner, Colt positioning himself so he could watch the door. A waitress approached, an older woman with gray hair and tired eyes, and took their order without comment. So, Elena said once the waitress left, what's your plan? March up to Silas and demand he leave town? Something like that, Elias said. That's not a plan. That's suicide. It's a start, Colt interjected. Fear works because people think they're alone. Show them they're not, and things change. Elena studied him. You sound like my father. Was he right? She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. About most things. But right doesn't stop bullets. No, Colt agreed. But it gives people a reason to stand up when the bullets start flying. Their food arrived. Eggs, bacon, biscuits that were hard enough to use as ammunition. Colt ate mechanically, his mind working through scenarios. Silas Redd had power because he'd built a system where fear replaced law and violence replaced accountability. Breaking that system meant more than just winning fights. It meant giving people something to believe in again. The door to the cafe banged open and 3 men walked in. They weren't locals. That much was obvious from their clean clothes and the deliberate way they carried themselves. Hired guns, Colt thought, the kind Silas would keep on payroll to handle problems. The tallest of them spotted Elias and smiled, the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse. Well, look who's still breathing. Heard you had a little accident, Crowe. Elias didn't look up from his plate. Accident implies it wasn't intentional, Decker. Decker, a lean man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his cheek, laughed and sauntered over to their table. His companions flanked him, hands resting easy on their gun belts. The cafe went silent. Boss wants to talk to you, Decker said. Figured after your experience, you might be ready to listen to reason. Well, I'm done listening to Silas's version of reason, Elias said calmly. Tell him the answer's still no. Decker's smile faded. You're making a mistake, old man. Boss is being generous. He's offering fair market value for Iron Mesa. More than fair, considering the trouble you've caused. Trouble I've caused? Elias set down his fork and looked up. Your boys burned my bunkhouse, shot my foreman, and tried to lynch me. That sound like I'm the one causing trouble? You're the one refusing progress, Decker countered. The valley's changing, Crowe. Either you change with it or you get left behind. And trust me, you don't want to be left behind. Colt had been quiet through the exchange, eating his eggs and watching, but now he set down his own fork and leaned back in his chair, his coat falling open just enough to show the Colt 45 on his hip. He already gave you his answer, Colt said, his voice flat and cold. So unless you've got something new to say, you're wasting our time. Decker's eyes shifted to Colt, sizing him up. And who the hell are you? Someone who doesn't repeat himself. The air in the cafe turned electric. Decker's hand drifted toward his pistol, and Colt saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing whether the stranger was worth the risk. Easy, Decker, Elena said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. Unless you want to explain to Silas why you started a gunfight in the middle of town over breakfast. Decker's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. This isn't over. It never is, Colt replied. Decker and his men left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. The other patrons in the cafe slowly resumed their conversations, though their voices stayed low and their glances kept darting toward Colt and Elias. You just made an enemy, Elena said quietly. Good, Colt said. Enemies are predictable. They finished their meal in relative silence and left the cafe with Elena still shadowing them. Outside, the street was busier now, wagons rolling past, shopkeepers opening their doors, the town waking up to another day of pretending everything was normal. Where are you staying? Elias asked Elena. Above the old newspaper office, she said. Can't afford much else since, well... Oh, come out to the ranch, Elias said. It's safer than town, and I could use someone who knows how to use their brain. Elena hesitated, then shook her head. I can't leave. If I do, Silas wins. The paper was my father's life. I won't let it die with him. You planning to reopen it? Colt asked. Eventually. Once I figure out how to do it without ending up like my father. Colt respected that. Stubbornness in the face of overwhelming odds was something he understood. You need help. You know where to find us. Elena nodded, then surprised them both by reaching out and gripping Elias's hand. Be careful. Silas doesn't just want your land. He wants to prove no one can stand against him. You're a symbol now, whether you wanted to be or not. I know, Elias said quietly. They parted ways, Colt and Elias heading back to their horses, while Elena disappeared into the maze of alleys behind the main street. As they rode out of town, Colt couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by Silas's men, but by everyone. The whole town was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The ride back to Iron Mesa was quiet until they were halfway home. Then Elias spoke, his voice thoughtful. You handled Decker well back there. I've handled worse. I don't doubt it. Elias was silent for a moment, then said, You know what you're getting into, right? This isn't just about keeping me alive. Silas has built an empire on fear and corruption. Taking him down means taking on everyone who benefits from that system. The men he's bought. The officials who look the other way. The ranchers too scared to fight back. I know, Colt said. Then why? You said you're not the charitable type. So what's in this for you besides half a ranch you might not live long enough to enjoy? Colt thought about that. He thought about his brother, about Deke Holloway, about the years he'd spent drifting from one town to the next with nothing but anger and a hunger for revenge, keeping him moving. I'm tired, he said finally. Tired of running, tired of watching good people get crushed because bad men have more guns and fewer scruples. Maybe this is my chance to stand for something that matters. Elias smiled, a real smile this time. That's a hell of a reason. It's the only one I've got. They arrived back at the ranch to find someone waiting for them. A young man, barely out of his teens, sitting on the porch steps with a rifle across his knees. He stood when he saw them approach, his face nervous but determined. Mr. Crowe, the young man said, my name's Tommy Birch. I worked for you last summer, before everything. Elias dismounted slowly, studying the boy. I remember. You were good with horses. Still am. Tommy swallowed hard. I heard you were back. Heard you were looking to make a stand against Silas. I want to help. Colt exchanged a glance with Elias. The boy looked scared, but there was steel underneath the fear. The kind of steel that came from making a hard decision and sticking to it. It's dangerous, Elias warned. Silas doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. I know, Tommy said, but I can't keep living like this. My family lost our farm to Silas 2 months ago. My father drinks himself to sleep every night because he feels like a failure. My mother cries when she thinks no one's listening. I'm tired of being afraid. Colt dismounted and walked up to the porch, looking the boy in the eye. You know how to shoot that rifle? Yes, sir. You ever shot at a man? Tommy hesitated, then shook his head. No, sir. Good, Colt said. Because once you cross that line, there's no going back. You sure this is what you want? Tommy met his gaze without flinching. I'm sure. Elias sighed and nodded. All right, you can stay. But you follow orders, and you don't take stupid risks. Understood? Understood. They put Tommy to work repairing the damaged corral while Colt and Elias sat down to plan. Maps were spread across the table in the main house, showing the valley and the surrounding ranches. Elias marked each property with a name and a note, who owned it, who'd sold, who was still holding on. Silas controls about 60% of the valley now, Elias said, pointing to the marked areas. Most of it acquired in the last 6 months, some through legitimate sales, but a lot through intimidation, fires, vandalism, threats, a few outright murders dressed up as accidents. What about allies? Colt asked. Anyone left who might stand with us? Elias tapped a spot on the map. Black Pine Ranch, owned by a man named Samuel Garrett. He's stubborn as hell and hasn't sold yet, but Silas has been putting pressure on him. If we can convince Samuel to hold out, maybe others will follow. And if he won't, then we're on our own. Colt studied the map, tracing the lines of ridges and rivers. The valley was a natural fortress, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and open to the plains on the 4th. Control the high ground, control the valley. Basic military strategy. We need to make Silas react instead of act, Colt said. Right now, he's calling all the shots. We change that, we change the game. How? Colt's finger moved to a spot on the map, a narrow pass between 2 ridges. His men use this route to move between the ranches they've taken over. If we block it, we cut off his supply lines, force him to come to us instead of waiting for him to pick us off one by one. Elias's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. That's bold. Also insane. Best plans usually are. Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Tommy proved invaluable. He knew the valley like the back of his hand, knew which trails were safe and which were watched. Together, they scouted the pass Colt had identified, confirming it was as strategic as he'd thought. On the 4th day, they made their move. It was simple, really. A rock slide, carefully triggered with dynamite Tommy had borrowed from an old mining camp, blocked the pass completely. Silas's men would have to go 20 miles out of their way to reach the eastern ranches now. Word of the blockade spread fast. By evening, Colt knew Silas would have heard, and by morning, there would be consequences. He was right. They came at dawn. 8 riders, heavily armed, led by a man Colt recognized from Elias's description. Voss. Tall, cold-eyed, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He wore 2 pistols and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd killed often and never lost sleep over it. Colt, Elias, and Tommy were waiting for them at the ranch, positioned behind cover with rifles loaded and ready. Voss reined in his horse 50 yards from the house and called out, "Elias Crowe, come out and let's talk like reasonable men." Elias stepped onto the porch, shotgun cradled in his arms. "I'm listening." "Mr. Red wants to make this simple," Voss said. "Reopen that pass by sundown, and we'll forget this little tantrum. Keep it blocked, and things get ugly." "It's already ugly," Elias shot back. "Has been since Silas started stealing land and calling it business." Voss's expression didn't change. "Last chance, Crowe." "Go to hell," Voss sighed, almost regretful. Then he drew his pistol. Colt fired first. Not at Voss, but at the man beside him. The rider jerked and fell from his saddle, and chaos erupted. Voss's men scattered, returning fire as they sought cover. Bullets tore into the porch, splintered wood, shattered windows. Colt dropped behind the water trough, methodically picking his targets. Tommy fired from the barn, his shots wild but keeping the riders pinned. Elias held the porch, his shotgun booming like thunder. Voss remained mounted, calm as death. and fired twice. The first shot took out the lantern hanging by the door. The second grazed Elias's shoulder, spinning him back into the house. Colt's blood turned cold. He rose from cover and fired 3 times in rapid succession. Voss's horse reared and the man finally dismounted, taking cover behind a wagon. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Silas's men were down, 3 were wounded, and the rest were retreating. Voss was the last to leave, and even then he moved without hurry, reloading his pistols as he walked his horse backward. "This isn't over, Crowe," he shouted. "Not by a long shot." Then he was gone, and the valley fell silent again. Colt ran to the house and found Elias slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his shirt. The wound was shallow, painful, but not fatal. "You all right?" Colt asked. "Define all right," Elias muttered, but he managed a grin. "We hurt them. That's what matters." Tommy appeared in the doorway, pale but unhurt. "They'll be back." "Of course they will," Colt said, binding Elias's shoulder with strips torn from a clean shirt. "But next time they'll think twice before charging in blind." That night, they sat around the fire in the main house, nursing their wounds and their exhaustion. Outside, the valley stretched dark and endless, and somewhere out there, Silas Red was planning his next move. But for the first time since Colt had ridden into Red Hollow, he felt something shift. Fear was still there, thick and heavy, but underneath it, something else was stirring. Hope. Fragile and stubborn, but real. And hope, Colt had learned, was the most dangerous thing a man could give to people who'd forgotten how to fight back. The wound in Elias's shoulder kept him in bed for 2 days, which gave Colt time to think and Tommy time to prove he was worth more than his age suggested. The boy had a knack for details. He noticed tracks where others saw dirt, remembered conversations most men forgot, and moved through the valley like a ghost when Colt sent him out to scout. On the morning of the 3rd day, Tommy returned from Red Hollow with news that made Colt's jaw tighten. "Silas is making his move on Black Pine Ranch," Tommy said, breathless from riding hard. "Samuel Garrett's place. I heard men talking in the general store. They're planning something big. Tonight, maybe tomorrow." Colt looked at Elias, who was sitting up now despite the doctor's orders, his face drawn but determined. "We knew this was coming." "Knowing it and stopping it are different things," Elias replied. He tried to stand, winced, and settled back against the pillow. "Samuel's good people. Served in the war, raised 4 kids on that land. If Silas takes Black Pine, there won't be anyone left in this valley willing to fight." "Then we don't let him take it," Colt said simply. Tommy looked between them. "It's 15 miles to Black Pine. If we ride now, we can get there before dark." "You're not going," Colt said. The boy's face flushed. "I can help. You can help by staying here and making sure Mr. Crowe doesn't bleed out while I'm gone." Colt's tone left no room for argument. "Someone needs to hold this place, and it can't be a man with one good arm." Elias started to protest, but Colt cut him off. "You know I'm right. You ride into a fight in your condition, you're a liability, not an asset." The older man's mouth pressed into a hard line, but he nodded. "Samuel's got 2 sons, Jacob and Matthew. Both can shoot. If you can get them organized, you might have a chance." "What does Samuel look like?" "Big man, gray beard, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a sawmill accident, stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery." Elias managed a weak smile. "You'll like him." Colt gathered his gear, rifle, pistol, ammunition, and a canteen. He saddled Ash and was preparing to mount when he heard hoofbeats coming fast from the direction of town. His hand went to his gun, but he relaxed when he recognized the rider. Elena Cade pulled her horse to a stop in a spray of dust, her dark hair coming loose from its bun and her face flushed with urgency. "You're going to Black Pine." It wasn't a question. Colt nodded. "How'd you know?" "Because I'm not deaf, and Silas's men aren't quiet when they drink. They were in the saloon last night, bragging about how they're going to burn Samuel Garrett out and take his land." Her eyes were fierce. "I'm coming with you." "No." "I wasn't asking permission." She dismounted and checked the small pistol in her coat pocket, then pulled a Winchester rifle from her saddle. "My father died trying to expose what Silas is doing. I won't sit in town and wait for someone else to tell me how this ends." Colt studied her. She was scared. He could see it in the tightness around her eyes. But she was also resolute. Fear didn't make you weak if you moved forward anyway. Can you shoot that rifle? Well enough. Well enough isn't good enough when men are shooting back. Elena's chin lifted. My father taught me. I've hunted deer, coyotes, and once put down a mountain lion that was killing our chickens. I can handle myself. From the porch, Elias called out, Let her go, Colt. You'll need all the help you can get, and Elena's tougher than she looks. Colt hesitated, then nodded. Stay close. Do what I say when I say it. And if things go bad, you run. Understood? Understood. They rode hard, pushing their horses across the valley floor and into the foothills where Black Pine Ranch sat nestled against the mountains. The land here was different, rockier, with stands of pine and aspen that gave the place its name. It was good country, the kind that required sweat and stubbornness to work, but rewarded those who did. As they approached, Colt slowed, his eyes scanning the terrain. Smoke rose from the main house, thin and gray. Cooking smoke, not fire. That was good. They weren't too late. But when they crested the final ridge, Colt saw the riders. 7 men, maybe 8, positioned around the perimeter of the ranch. They weren't attacking yet, just watching, waiting. Psychological warfare, Colt realized. Make Samuel sweat. Make him wonder when it would start. Make him consider surrender before the first shot was fired. We can't just ride down there, Elena whispered. They'll see us coming. Good, Colt said. He drew his rifle and fired a single shot into the air. The riders whirled, hands going to their weapons, searching for the source. Colt fired again, this time kicking up dirt near the closest horse. The animal bolted, throwing its rider, and chaos rippled through the group. What are you doing? Elena hissed. Changing the odds. Colt spurred Ash forward, riding hard down the slope with Elena struggling to keep up. He fired twice more, not at men, but at horses, scattering the group and forcing them to focus on controlling their mounts instead of coordinating an attack. By the time they reached the ranch yard, the front door had opened and a man stood there with a shotgun, big, gray-bearded, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Samuel Garrett. Get inside, Colt shouted. Samuel didn't hesitate. He and 2 younger men, his sons, Colt assumed, provided covering fire as Colt and Elena dismounted and ran for the house. Bullets whined past, splintering the porch rail and punching holes in the door, but they made it through. Samuel slammed the door and threw the bolt. Who the hell are you? Colt Varren. Elias Crowe sent me. Recognition flickered across Samuel's face. Heard about you. Heard you put some holes in Decker's crew. He looked at Elena. Miss Cade, sorry about your father. Thank you, Elena said quietly. The older of Samuel's sons, a lean man in his late 20s with his father's jaw and eyes, peered through a gap in the shuttered window. They're regrouping. Looks like they're getting ready for a real push this time. How long have they been here? Colt asked. Since noon, Samuel said. Started with threats. Told me I had until sundown to clear out or they'd clear me out. I told them what they could do with their deadline. You have enough ammunition? Enough to make them regret coming here, not enough to hold out forever. Samuel's expression was grim. My wife and daughter are in the cellar. If this goes bad, it won't, Colt interrupted. He moved to the window and assessed the situation. The riders had pulled back behind the barn and a tool shed, using them for cover. Smart. They'd learned from the fight at Iron Mesa. How many entrances to this house? Colt asked. Front door, back door, and a root cellar entrance outside, the younger son answered. He couldn't have been more than 20, with his mother's blonde hair and a face that hadn't yet lost its boyish softness. I'm Matthew, by the way. That's my brother Jacob. Watch the back, Colt told Matthew. If they're smart, they'll try to flank us. And if they're not smart, Elena asked, then this gets ugly fast. They didn't have to wait long. The first assault came as the sun touched the horizon, painting the valley in blood-red light. The riders charged from 2 directions. 4 from the barn, 3 from the tool shed. They fired as they came, a wall of lead that shattered windows and tore through the wooden walls. Colt and Jacob returned fire from the front, while Samuel covered the side window. The noise was deafening. Gunshots, shouting, the screams of wounded horses. Colt dropped one rider, then another, his movements calm and methodical despite the chaos. Beside him, Jacob fought with the controlled fury of a man defending his home. From the back of the house, Matthew shouted a warning. "Two coming around the rear!" Elena moved without hesitation, running to the back door with her Winchester. Colt heard her fire once, twice, then a man scream. She returned a moment later, her face pale but her hands steady. "Got one?" The other ran. The assault broke as quickly as it started. The riders retreated, dragging their wounded with them, leaving 2 bodies in the yard. In the sudden silence, Colt counted his remaining ammunition and didn't like the numbers. "We can't hold them off another push like that," Jacob said, voicing what they were all thinking. Samuel reloaded his shotgun with grim efficiency. "Then we make sure there isn't another push." "How?" Matthew asked. Colt was already moving toward the back door. "They're regrouping at the barn, probably planning to wait us out or burn us out. We don't give them the chance." "You're talking about going out there," Elena said. "That's suicide." "It's tactical." Colt checked his pistol, his rifle, the knife in his boot. "They're expecting us to sit here and defend. We take the fight to them. We control the engagement." Samuel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "What do you need?" "A distraction, something loud." 10 minutes later, Colt was slipping out the root cellar entrance while Matthew set fire to a hay wagon on the east side of the property. The flames caught fast, sending smoke and sparks into the darkening sky. As predicted, the riders focused on the new threat, shouting and scrambling to figure out if it was an accident or an attack. Colt used the distraction to circle wide, moving through the shadows like a predator. He reached the barn and pressed himself against the wall, listening. Inside, men were arguing. "This is taking too long. Voss said no witnesses, we burn them out, questions get asked." "So what? Silas owns the questions and the answers." Colt recognized that last voice. Decker, the man he'd faced down in the cafe. Colt's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He moved to the barn's side door and pulled it open just enough to slip inside. The interior was dark except for a lantern hanging from a post. 4 men stood clustered around it, their backs to Colt. "Perfect." "Evening, gentlemen," Colt said. They spun, reaching for their guns, but Colt was faster. He fired twice, dropping the 2 closest to him. Decker dove behind a stall, returning fire wildly. Colt rolled, came up behind a feed barrel, and put a bullet through the lantern. Darkness swallowed the barn. In the chaos, Colt moved, using sound to track his targets. A man fired blindly, and Colt answered, hearing the body hit the floor. Decker was still out there, breathing hard, trying to stay quiet. "You should have stayed in town," Colt called out, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "You should have minded your own business," Decker shot back. His voice came from the left, near the horse stalls. Colt didn't answer. He moved silently, circling, getting closer. He heard Decker shift, heard the scrape of boot on wood, and fired at the sound. Decker grunted, stumbled into the open, and Colt's second shot took him in the shoulder. Decker went down hard, his gun clattering away into the darkness. Colt approached, his pistol leveled, and looked down at the wounded man. "Tell Silas this valley isn't for sale," Colt said quietly. "And tell him the next man he sends, I won't wound." He left Decker there and slipped back out into the night. The barn was silent now except for the moaning of injured men. Colt returned to the house through the root cellar, emerging to find Samuel and his son staring at him like he'd walked out of a ghost story. "It's done," Colt said. "All of them?" Jacob asked. "Enough." Colt reloaded his weapons with hands that were perfectly steady despite the adrenaline still singing through his blood. They won't be back tonight. But as dawn broke, painting the valley in soft gold light, Colt knew the war was far from over. He stood on the porch of Samuel Garrett's house, looking at the bodies they'd dragged to the side of the yard, and felt the weight of what was coming. Silas Red wouldn't accept these losses quietly. Men like him never did. The proof came at midday when a rider approached under a white flag. He was young, clearly terrified, and held a sealed envelope like it might explode. "Message from Mr. Red," the boy stammered, thrusting the envelope at Samuel. He said to make sure you read it." Samuel tore it open and read, his face darkening with each line. When he finished, he handed it to Colt without a word. The message was simple, direct, and chilling in its clarity. Silas demanded the immediate surrender of both Black Pine Ranch and Iron Mesa Ranch. Failure to comply within 48 hours would result in what he called total reclamation of property by any means necessary. The letter was signed and notarized, dressed up in legal language that barely concealed the threat underneath. Colt folded the letter and looked at the messenger. "Tell Silas Red we'll see him in hell first." The boy fled, and Samuel let out a long breath. "He's going to bring everything he has." "I know." "We can't fight an army, Colt, not with what we've got." "Then we get more." Colt turned to Elena, who'd been listening from the doorway. "You said your father had proof of what Silas was doing. Documents, ledgers." "He did, but they disappeared when he died." "Where would he have hidden them? Really hidden them, somewhere Silas's men wouldn't think to look?" Elena thought hard, her brow furrowing. Then her eyes widened. "The church. My father was on the building committee. He had access to the bell tower for repairs." She looked at Colt with dawning hope. "No one goes up there. It's half rotted through." "Then that's where we go." They rode back to Red Hollow with Samuel and his son staying behind to fortify Black Pine. The town was quieter than ever when they arrived, the streets nearly empty in the afternoon heat. Colt and Elena dismounted outside the small church at the edge of town, a modest building with peeling white paint and a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old wood and dust. Elena led Colt to a narrow stairway hidden behind the pulpit. The steps creaked ominously under their weight as they climbed into darkness. The bell tower was exactly as Elena described, half-rotted, full of bird nests and forgotten hymnals. But in the corner, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked behind a loose board, they found what they were looking for. 3 ledgers, 2 bundles of correspondence, and a stack of legal documents that made Colt's blood run cold as he read them. "These are land deeds," he said slowly, "but the signatures don't match the names." Elena looked over his shoulder. "Forgeries?" "Has to be. Your father marked the discrepancies here. See? The witness signatures change between documents for the same property. Same with the dates. Silas has been fabricating sales, then using intimidation to make people go along with the lie." "This proves he's stealing land," Elena breathed. "This could bring him down." "If we can get it in front of someone who'll listen." Colt gathered the documents carefully. "We need a judge. A real one. Not someone on Silas's payroll." "Circuit judge comes through in 2 weeks," Elena said. "Judge Cartwright. He's old-fashioned, honest. My father trusted him." 2 weeks is a long time when Silas has 48 hours on the clock. They descended from the tower and stepped out of the church into the late afternoon sun. Colt's instinct screamed a warning half a second before the shot rang out. He shoved Elena down as the bullet passed through the space where her head had been, slamming into the church door behind them. Colt drew and fired toward the roofline across the street where he'd seen the muzzle flash. A figure ducked back, and then boots were running on shingles. "Stay down," Colt ordered, then sprinted toward the building. He reached the alley in time to see a man drop from the roof and run. Colt gave chase, his boots pounding dirt, his breath coming hard and fast. The shooter was young and fast, but Colt was relentless. He closed the distance through the maze of back alleys until the man made a mistake, turned into a dead end, a courtyard boxed in by buildings on 3 sides. The shooter spun, raising his pistol, and Colt shot it out of his hand. The weapon flew, and the man dropped to his knees, clutching his bleeding fingers. "Please," the man gasped. "Please don't kill me. I was just doing what I was told." Colt walked closer, his gun steady. "Who told you?" "Voss, he said if I didn't take the shot, he'd kill my sister. She works at the saloon. He said he'd make it look like an accident." Colt felt something twist in his chest. This was how Silas worked, not just through greed, but through leverage, finding people's weaknesses and exploiting them without mercy. "What's your name?" "Charlie. Charlie Webb." "You go back to Voss," Colt said quietly. "And you tell him Colt Varren says the next man who points a gun at Elena Cade won't get a warning. He'll get a funeral. Understood?" Charlie nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet and clutching his wounded hand. He ran, disappearing into the shadows, and Colt returned to find Elena standing outside the church with the documents clutched to her chest. "You all right?" he asked. "I will be." But her hands were shaking. "They're getting desperate." "Good. Desperate men make mistakes." They returned to Iron Mesa as the sun set, the sky streaked with purple and gold. Elias was on the porch, looking stronger but still favoring his wounded shoulder. When he saw the documents, his eyes lit up with something Colt hadn't seen before: genuine hope. "This is it," Elias said, flipping through the pages. "This is enough to take him down legally." "If we survive long enough to use it," Colt replied. He told Elias about the deadline, about the sniper, about the growing sense that Silas was preparing for an all-out assault. Elias set down the ledgers and looked Colt in the eye. "There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you from the start." Colt waited. "The land transfer I filed," Elias continued, "making you half owner of Iron Mesa. It wasn't just strategy. I meant it. I've got no family left, Colt. No children, no siblings. This place has been my whole life, but I'm not fool enough to think I'll live forever." He paused, his voice rough with emotion. "You came here hunting a killer and ended up fighting for people you don't even know. That's the kind of man I want protecting this valley when I'm gone." Colt didn't know what to say. He'd spent so long moving, running, chasing ghosts that the idea of having something permanent, something real, felt foreign and terrifying and right, all at once. "I'm not a rancher," he said finally. "Neither was I when I started," Elias replied. "But you're a fighter, and right now that's what this land needs." Elena stepped forward, her face serious. "Whatever happens in the next 2 days, we need to be ready. Silas won't just send gunmen. He'll come with everything. Hired killers, corrupt officials, maybe even vigilantes he's convinced they're on the side of justice." "Then we make sure the truth gets out first," Colt said. He looked at Elena. "Can you write? I mean, really write? Like your father did?" "I worked with him for 5 years. I can write." "Good. Then you're going to write the story of what's happening here. Names, dates, evidence, everything we've found. And tomorrow morning, you're going to print it and spread it through every corner of this valley." Elena's eyes widened. "The newspaper office? It's been locked since my father died." "Then we unlock it." That night, while Elias rested and Tommy stood watch, Colt and Elena rode back to Red Hollow, under cover of darkness. They broke into the newspaper office through a rear window, and Elena lit lamps while Colt stood guard. The office was exactly as her father had left it: papers scattered across the desk, typeset in the press, ink dried in the wells. Elena moved through it like walking through a shrine, touching things with reverent care before settling at the desk and beginning to write. Colt watched her work, watched the way her hand moved swift and sure across the page, watched the way her jaw set with determination even as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She was writing her father's legacy and her own future all at once. By dawn, it was done. Elena fed the pages into the press, her hands remembering the rhythm her father had taught her, and the machine clattered to life. 1 copy, 10, 50, 100. The truth multiplied and unstoppable. They loaded the papers into saddlebags and rode through the valley as the sun rose, leaving stacks at every farm, every crossroads, every place people gathered. By noon, the whole valley would know what Silas Red had done. And by evening, they'd have to choose: stand with the truth or continue living under the lie. When they returned to Iron Mesa, they found Samuel Garrett waiting with his sons and 6 other men Colt didn't recognize. "Read your paper," Samuel said, holding up a copy. "Figured you could use some help." "Who are they?" Colt asked. "Ranchers, farmers, men who've been too scared to fight back but are tired of being scared." Samuel's expression was hard. "Silas crossed a line going after Black Pine. Made people realize nowhere's safe. So they're ready to make a stand." Colt looked at the assembled men. Weathered faces, calloused hands, eyes that had seen too much hardship but still held fire. They weren't soldiers, they weren't gunfighters, but they were here. "Silas has 48 hours on the clock," Colt said. "He'll come hard and fast. Some of you might die. Are you ready for that?" One of the men, an older farmer with a face like cracked leather, spat tobacco juice and said, "Been ready since Silas burned my barn and called it lightning strike. Let him come." The others murmured agreement, and Colt felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about stopping a land grab anymore. It was about giving people back their dignity, their courage, their right to stand on their own ground without fear. It was about building something worth defending. "All right," Colt said. "Then let's get to work." They turned Iron Mesa into a fortress. The men worked through the day and into the night, dragging wagons into defensive positions, boarding up windows that faced the most likely approach routes, and establishing firing positions that would give them overlapping fields of coverage. Colt moved among them, offering suggestions born from experience, while Elias directed the overall effort despite his injury. By the second morning after the deadline, they had 14 men willing to stand and fight. It wasn't an army, but it was more than Colt had expected. More importantly, these men weren't mercenaries fighting for pay. They were defending something that mattered to them. That made them dangerous in ways hired guns could never match. Samuel's older son Jacob proved to have a tactical mind that surprised Colt. The young man suggested positioning sentries in the timber beyond the main buildings, giving them early warning of any approach. It was smart thinking, the kind that could mean the difference between preparation and panic. "You ever serve?" Colt asked him as they walked the perimeter. "No, sir. But my grandfather fought in the Mexican War. Used to tell stories about it when I was young." Jacob's expression was thoughtful. He always said the side that sees trouble coming first usually wins. "Your grandfather was a wise man." They were placing the last sentry when Tommy came running from the house, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Riders coming! From town! A lot of them!" Colt's hand went to his pistol as he scanned the horizon. He counted them as they approached, 20, maybe 25 riders, moving fast and kicking up a dust cloud that looked like a storm rolling across the prairie. Too many to be a simple raid. This was the assault Silas had promised. "Everyone to positions," Colt shouted. The men scattered, moving to the defenses they'd prepared. Colt took his place behind the main wagon barrier with his rifle loaded and ready, Elias beside him with the shotgun despite Colt's earlier protests. But as the riders drew closer, something felt wrong. They weren't spreading out for an attack. They weren't drawing weapons. Instead, they slowed to a trot, then a walk, and the man in front raised his hand in a gesture that was more greeting than threat. Colt kept his rifle up but didn't fire. "What is this?" The riders came to a stop 50 yards out, and the lead man dismounted. He was middle-aged, with thinning hair and a suit that had seen better days. Behind him, Colt saw townspeople, shopkeepers, farmers, even the nervous clerk Henry from the land office. "Mr. Crowe," the man called out. "Mr. Varren, we need to talk." Elias squinted. "That's Mayor Hastings, or what passes for a mayor in this town. Can we trust him?" "About as far as I can throw him, but he doesn't usually ride with a crowd unless he thinks the wind's changing direction." Colt stepped out from behind the wagon, rifle still ready, and walked forward to meet the mayor halfway. Up close, Hastings looked exhausted and frightened, his collar stained with sweat despite the cool morning air. "Say your piece," Colt said. Hastings glanced back at the crowd, then met Colt's eyes. "That newspaper, the one Miss Cade printed, it's all over the valley. People are reading it, talking about it. And they're angry, Mr. Varren. Angry at Silas Red, but also angry at themselves for letting it go on so long." "Good," Colt said. "They should be." "You don't understand." Hastings wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Silas knows. He's furious. He's calling in every man he has, every favor he's owed. He's planning to ride on Iron Mesa and Black Pine simultaneously. He's going to burn both ranches to the ground and kill anyone who stands in his way." "When?" "Tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning. But soon." Hastings took a shaky breath. "That's why we're here. These people want to help. They want to stand with you." Colt looked past the mayor at the assembled crowd. He saw merchants who'd never held a gun in their lives standing next to farmers with hunting rifles. He saw women, too, wives and daughters who'd brought food and medical supplies. It was a ragtag group held together by nothing but desperation and a flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to live in fear anymore. "Why now?" Colt asked. "Why not a month ago or 6 months ago when this started?" One of the townsmen stepped forward, an older man with a shopkeeper's apron still tied around his waist. "Because we were cowards, Mr. Varren. We told ourselves it wasn't our fight, that if we kept our heads down, Silas would leave us alone." His voice cracked. "But Miss Cade's newspaper made it clear. There's no such thing as staying out of it. Silas won't stop until he owns everything and everyone. So we either stand now or spend the rest of our lives on our knees." The words hung in the air, raw and honest. Colt saw the truth in the man's face, saw it reflected in the others. They were terrified, but they were here. "Can any of you shoot?" Colt asked. About half raised their hands. The others looked embarrassed, but they didn't leave. "Then the ones who can't shoot will help fortify positions, tend the wounded, and keep supplies moving. The ones who can will train. We've got maybe 12 hours before Silas makes his move, and I'm going to use every minute of it." He turned to Elias. "We're going to need more ammunition and more guns." Elias nodded. "There's a cache in the barn, my father's rifles from the war. They're old, but they'll fire." While the men dispersed to their tasks, Elena appeared beside Colt, her face determined. "I'm going back to town." "Like hell you are. Someone needs to keep printing, keep spreading the truth. If Silas thinks he can silence us by burning a ranch, he needs to know the story's already out there." Her eyes were fierce. "Besides, I can rally more people. There are still folks sitting on the fence waiting to see which way this goes. I can push them off the fence." Colt wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. The battle they were fighting wasn't just about bullets, it was about narrative, about which story the valley would believe. Silas's story of progress and opportunity, or the truth Elena had printed in black ink on white paper. "Take Tommy with you," Colt said finally. "And if shooting starts, you get out. No heroics." "Same to you." She rode out with Tommy trailing behind, and Colt turned his attention to transforming civilians into something resembling a fighting force. It was brutal work. Most of the townspeople had never been in a real fight, and the few who had were rusty and scared. But Colt pushed them hard, drilling them on basic tactics, how to take cover, how to reload under pressure, how to shoot at center mass instead of wasting ammunition on fancy shots. Samuel and Jacob worked alongside him, their experience adding credibility to Colt's instructions. By mid-afternoon, the defenders had doubled in number and tripled in confidence. It still wasn't enough to match Silas's firepower, but it was something. As the sun began its descent, a lone rider approached under a white flag. Colt recognized him immediately. Voss, sitting tall in the saddle with his twin pistols gleaming and his expression carved from granite. "I'll talk to him," Colt said, handing his rifle to Samuel. "Cover me." He walked out to meet Voss in the open ground between the ranch and the road. Up close, the gunfighter was even more intimidating, cold eyes that had seen too much death and felt nothing about it, hands that rested easy on his guns like they were extensions of his body. "Nice speech you gave the townspeople," Voss said. "Very inspiring. I didn't come out here for compliments." "No, you came out here because you're curious what I have to say." Voss smiled, thin and humorless. "Mr. Red sent me with a final offer. Surrender Iron Mesa and Black Pine peacefully. Walk away with your lives. He'll even throw in a stake, say $1,000 each for you and Crowe. That's generous, considering." "Considering what?" "Considering the alternative is we kill every last one of you and take the land anyway." Voss's tone was conversational, like he was discussing the weather. "You've got heart, Varren. I respect that. But heart doesn't stop bullets. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for people who aren't worth dying for. Take the money, ride out, live to fight another day." Colt studied him. "You really believe that? That these people aren't worth it?" "I believe in gold and lead," Voss replied. "Everything else is just stories people tell themselves to sleep at night." "Then here's a story for you," Colt said quietly. "Tell Silas Red that Colt Varren says no. Tell him we're not walking away, not surrendering, and not backing down. Tell him if he wants this land, he's going to have to take it over our dead bodies. And tell him that when this is over, I'm coming for him personally." Voss's smile faded. "That's your final answer?" "That's my only answer." The gunfighter nodded slowly, almost respectfully. "Then I'll see you when the shooting starts." He turned his horse and rode away without looking back, and Colt returned to find the defenders watching him with expressions that ranged from fear to admiration. "What did he say?" Elias asked. "He offered us money to walk away." "And you said?" "I told him to go to hell." A few of the men laughed, nervous but genuine. The laughter died quickly when they saw the dust cloud rising in the distance. Riders, lots of them, moving toward the ranch like an incoming tide. "Positions!" Colt shouted. "This is it!" The men scattered to their assigned posts. Colt took his place at the main barricade with Elias, Samuel, and Jacob beside him. The defenders numbered 23 now, not nearly enough, but all they had. The attacking force stopped just out of rifle range and spread out in a long line. Colt counted them, 30 riders, maybe more, with Voss and Silas Red himself at the center. Silas sat on a black stallion, dressed like he was attending a business meeting rather than a battle, his face calm and confident. "Elias Crowe," Silas called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "This is your last chance. Surrender now and I'll let everyone walk away." "We both know that's a lie, Silas," Elias shouted back. "You've already made up your mind to take everything." "Then you've made your choice." Silas raised his hand, and Colt saw the line of riders tense, ready to charge. But before Silas could drop his hand, a new sound cut through the tension. Hoofbeats, coming fast from the direction of town. Both sides turned to see a group of riders approaching, and Colt's heart lifted when he recognized Elena at the front, Tommy beside her, and behind them at least 30 more townspeople armed with whatever weapons they could find. They didn't stop at the ranch. They rode past, positioning themselves between Iron Mesa and Silas's forces, forming a second line of defense that made Silas's expression darken with rage. "You don't have the numbers, Silas," Elena shouted, her voice ringing with defiance. "Not anymore. These people are done being afraid of you." For a long moment, everything hung in balance. Colt could see Silas calculating, weighing his options, realizing that the easy victory he'd expected had just become a bloodbath that might go either way. Then Voss leaned over and said something to Silas, and whatever he said made Silas's face go hard as stone. "If that's how you want it," Silas snarled, "burn them out, all of them." The line of riders charged, and the world exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides, a wall of sound that made Colt's ears ring. He fired methodically, picking targets, watching riders fall or veer away. Beside him, Elias worked the shotgun with grim efficiency while Samuel and Jacob provided steady covering fire. The townspeople fought with desperate courage, holding the line even as bullets tore through their ranks. Colt saw the shopkeeper go down, saw one of the farmers take a hit to the leg but keep firing. The noise was overwhelming, shouting, screaming, the crack of rifles, and the boom of shotguns. Silas's men tried to flank, tried to break through, but the defenders had the advantage of prepared positions and sheer determination. Every time a gap opened, someone filled it. Every time a man fell, another stepped up. Colt spotted Voss cutting through the chaos, his twin pistols spitting fire as he drove toward the main barricade. Colt dropped his rifle and drew his Colt 45, meeting Voss's charge head-on. They fired simultaneously. Voss's bullet grazed Colt's shoulder, burning like a brand. Colt's shot took Voss in the side, spinning him from his saddle. The gunfighter hit the ground hard but rolled to his feet, both pistols still in hand despite the blood spreading across his shirt. "Should have taken the money," Voss gasped, raising his guns. Colt fired twice more. Voss staggered, dropped one pistol, then the other. He looked at Colt with something almost like respect, then fell and didn't get up again. The death of Voss seemed to break something in Silas's forces. The charge faltered, men pulling back, reconsidering whether they were being paid enough to die for another man's greed. Silas screamed at them to hold the line, to keep fighting, but the momentum had shifted. Then, cutting through the noise of battle, came a sound that changed everything. A bugle call, clear and sharp, coming from the road that led to town. Both sides stopped fighting, turning to see a column of riders approaching under a federal flag. At their head rode a tall man in a Union cavalry uniform, his face weathered but his bearing military straight. Behind him came 20 soldiers, all armed, all moving with the discipline of trained troops. The officer raised his hand and the column halted. He surveyed the scene with cold blue eyes, then spoke in a voice that carried authority like thunder. "I am Captain James Morrison, United States Army, assigned to territorial peacekeeping. Under federal authority, I am ordering all parties to cease fire immediately and surrender your weapons." Silas looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is a local matter." "This is a matter of federal land law," Morrison replied. "I have been reviewing documentation provided by Miss Elena Cade regarding fraudulent land transfers and violent intimidation." He pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I also have testimony from multiple witnesses and evidence of forgery. Mr. Silas Red, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and incitement to violence." "This is outrageous," Silas sputtered. "I have lawyers. I have rights." You have the right to remain silent while my men take you into custody, Morrison said flatly. He gestured, and 4 soldiers moved forward to surround Silas. Anyone else who wishes to contest federal authority is welcome to try. Silas's remaining men looked at each other, looked at their boss being hauled from his horse, and made the smart choice. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The battle was over. In the stunned silence that followed, Colt lowered his pistol and looked around at the carnage. 3 defenders were dead, 7 wounded. Silas's forces had lost at least 10 men, with another dozen injured. The ground was littered with spent shells and blood, and the air reeked of gunpowder and fear. Elena dismounted and ran to Colt, her face streaked with dust and tears. I found them. The federal troops were camped 20 miles east, investigating territorial disputes. I rode out this morning and told them everything, showed them the documents. They came as fast as they could. Colt wanted to tell her she was brilliant, that she'd just saved all their lives. But before he could speak, Captain Morrison approached. Mr. Varren? The officer asked. That's me. Miss Cade speaks highly of you, says you've been defending these people against criminal conspiracy. Morrison's expression softened slightly. That took courage, but I'll need you and Mr. Crowe to provide official statements. There will be hearings, trials. This isn't over yet. I understand, Colt said, but it's a start. Morrison nodded. It is indeed. He looked around at the assembled defenders, battered, bloodied, but standing. You should all be proud. Not many people have the backbone to stand up to men like Red. The territory needs more citizens like you. As the soldiers began rounding up prisoners and tending to the wounded, Colt found Elias sitting on the porch steps, holding his shoulder where the old wound had reopened. Despite the pain, the older man was smiling. We did it, Elias said. We actually did it. We're not done yet, Colt replied. Silas will have lawyers. There'll be legal battles. Let them come. We've got truth on our side now, and witnesses willing to testify. Elias looked up at Colt. You know what this means, don't you? You're a landowner now. Half of Iron Mesa is legally yours. You can't just drift away anymore. Colt sat down beside him, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the last week crash over him like a wave. I'm starting to realize that. You gonna stay? Help build something real here? It was the question Colt had been avoiding since the moment he rode into Red Hollow. For years, he had defined himself by movement, always chasing, always running, never putting down roots because roots meant vulnerability. But looking at the people around him, at Samuel and his sons, at the townspeople who'd found their courage, at Elena organizing medical care for the wounded, Colt realized something had changed. He'd stopped running. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I will. Elias's smile widened. Good, because this valley is going to need someone with your particular skills while we rebuild. As evening fell, the defenders gathered around fires, tending wounds and sharing stories. The dead were laid out with respect, their sacrifice acknowledged by people who understood what it meant to stand for something bigger than yourself. The mood was somber but also hopeful, the kind of hope that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you. Elena found Colt as he was checking on the horses. She looked exhausted, her dress stained with blood from helping the doctor, but her eyes were clear. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For not walking away, for giving us a chance to fight back. She paused. My father would have liked you. I would have liked him too, I think. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Then Elena spoke again, her voice softer. What happens now? Now we rebuild, Colt said. We testify. We make sure Silas and everyone who worked for him answer for what they've done. And then we figure out how to make this valley into something worth protecting. That's a lot of work. It is, Colt looked at her. But I've learned that the hardest work is usually worth doing. Elena smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. Then I guess we'd better get started. Over the next few days, the valley began to transform. Captain Morrison established a temporary military post in Red Hollow to maintain order while the legal proceedings moved forward. The soldiers rounded up the last of Silas's men who hadn't fled, and witnesses came forward in droves, no longer afraid now that federal protection was in place. Henry, the nervous land office clerk, provided devastating testimony about the forged documents he'd been forced to process. The saloon owner talked about the intimidation tactics he'd witnessed. Even some of Silas's former employees turned on him, tired of being accomplices to crimes they could no longer stomach. The hearings were held in the town hall, packed with citizens who'd spent months in silence and now wanted to see justice done. Judge Cartwright presided, the honest circuit judge Elena's father had trusted, and he showed no mercy to Silas Redd. Colt testified for 2 hours, detailing everything from the attempted lynching of Elias to the final battle. Elena corroborated every word, backed by the physical evidence her father had hidden and the testimony of dozens of witnesses. When it was over, Silas Redd was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for fraud, conspiracy, assault, and attempted murder. His associates received similar sentences, and every fraudulent land transfer was voided and returned to its rightful owner. The valley, slowly but surely, began to heal. Iron Mesa became a gathering place for the newly empowered citizens. Colt and Elias hosted meetings where people discussed forming a proper town government, establishing real law enforcement, and building schools and churches. The conversations were heated and passionate, but they were real. People taking ownership of their future instead of letting it be dictated by fear. Samuel Garrett and his sons became regular fixtures at the ranch, helping Elias repair the damage from the attacks and planning how to rebuild the cattle operation. Other ranchers followed suit, forming cooperatives and support networks so no one would face the kind of isolation that had made them vulnerable in the first place. Elena reopened the newspaper, renaming it The Valley Voice and dedicating it to her father's memory. Her first editorial called for vigilance, for citizens to remember how easily freedom could be lost when good people stayed silent. It was powerful writing, the kind that made people think and feel and act. And through it all, Colt found himself settling into a life he'd never imagined. He learned the rhythms of ranch work, learned to read the land and the weather, learned that building something required different skills than tearing something down, but was infinitely more satisfying. One evening, about a month after the battle, Colt stood on the porch of the main house watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire and gold. Elias joined him, moving easier now that his wounds had healed. "You still thinking about Deke Holloway?" Elias asked. Colt had almost forgotten about the man he'd been chasing when this all started. The hunger for revenge that had driven him for 2 years felt distant now, like something from another life. "Sometimes," Colt admitted, "but not the way I used to." "Because you found something else to fight for?" "Something like that." Colt glanced at Elias. "You never did tell me where he was headed." Elias was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mexico. There's a town called San Miguel about 50 miles south of the border. Holloway had family there. That's where he runs when things get hot." Colt absorbed this information, feeling the old anger stir but not consume. "Thanks for telling me. You going after him?" It was a fair question. The old Colt would have already been saddling his horse, would have dropped everything to chase that final reckoning. But the man standing on this porch, looking at land he now owned and people who depended on him, wasn't quite the same man anymore. "Eventually," Colt said. "When the time's right. But not yet. There's too much work here that needs doing first." Elias nodded, satisfied. "That's growth, son. Real growth." The work of rebuilding a valley poisoned by fear and corruption proved harder than winning the battle itself. In the weeks following Silas Redd's arrest, Colt discovered that changing hearts took longer than changing laws. Some folks still whispered that maybe Silas had been right, that progress required hard choices. Others were simply too broken by what they'd endured to believe things could truly be different. But slowly, like winter ice melting under spring sun, the valley began to thaw. The first real test came 6 weeks after the battle, when Mayor Hastings called a town meeting to elect a proper marshal. The temporary military presence had kept order, but Captain Morrison made it clear his troops would be leaving soon. Red Hollow needed someone who would enforce the law without fear or favor, someone the people could trust. The meeting was held in the town hall on a cold November evening. Every seat was filled, with more people standing along the walls. Colt attended at Elias's insistence, though he had no intention of putting himself forward. He'd never been a badge-wearing man and didn't plan to start now. Mayor Hastings stood at the front, looking far more confident than he had before Silas's downfall. "We need someone with experience, someone who's proven they can stand up to threats, someone this town respects." "What about Colt Varren?" someone shouted from the back. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Colt felt every eye turn toward him and shook his head. I'm a rancher now, not a lawman. You were a lawman when you stood between us and Silas's guns, the shopkeeper said, the same man who'd confessed to cowardice weeks before. You were a lawman when you gave us the courage to fight back. Badge or no badge, you're the one we trust. He's right, Elena added from her seat near the front. We need someone who can't be bought and won't be intimidated. That's you, Mr. Varren. Colt stood, feeling the weight of their expectations like a physical thing. I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not the right choice. What this town needs is someone who wants to build a future here, not someone who's been running from his past. He paused, then continued. But I know someone who fits that description. He turned and looked directly at Jacob Garrett, Samuel's older son. The young man's eyes widened in surprise. Jacob fought beside us when it mattered, Colt said. He's smart, level-headed, and he cares about this valley because it's his home. He's young, but that means he can grow into the job. And he's got the kind of integrity this town needs. Samuel stood, pride evident on his weathered face. My son would serve honorably if called upon. Jacob looked overwhelmed, but didn't refuse. I'd need training, guidance. I'll give you both, Colt said, for as long as you need it. The vote was unanimous. Jacob Garrett became Red Hollow's first legitimately elected marshal, and Colt became his unofficial advisor. It was a compromise that satisfied everyone. The town got leadership they trusted, and Colt maintained the freedom to run Iron Mesa without being tied to a badge. As people filed out of the meeting, Elena caught up with Colt on the steps. That was well done, giving the job to Jacob instead of taking it yourself. It was the right choice. It was, but it also means you're planning to stay, doesn't it? You wouldn't commit to training someone if you were just passing through. Colt looked at her, at the way the lamplight caught the determination in her eyes, and realized she was right. Somewhere between arriving as a drifter hunting a killer and standing here as a landowner and community leader, he'd made a decision he hadn't even consciously acknowledged. I guess I am staying, he said. Elena smiled. Good. Because there's something I want to show you. She led him to the newspaper office, now clean and organized with new type and fresh ink. On the desk sat a stack of papers, and Elena handed him the top copy. It was the latest edition of the Valley Voice, and the headline read, From Fear to Freedom, How One Valley Found Its Courage. Colt scanned the article. It told the whole story. Silas's rise, the intimidation, the forged documents, and the final stand that changed everything. But it didn't just focus on the violence. It talked about the townspeople who'd found their voices, about the ranchers who'd formed cooperatives, about the new schools being planned and the businesses reopening. This is good writing, Colt said. It's the truth. That's all my father ever wanted, to tell the truth and trust people to do the right thing with it. Elena took the paper back and set it down carefully. I've been thinking about what comes next. The paper needs to be more than just news. It needs to be a voice for accountability, for keeping power honest. You planning to take on the whole territory? If that's what it takes. Her expression was fierce. My father died trying to expose corruption. I won't let that death be meaningless. Colt respected that kind of determination. It reminded him of why he'd stayed, because people like Elena, like Jacob, like all the ordinary citizens who'd found extraordinary courage, deserved a chance to build something that lasted. But the peace they'd fought for was still fragile, and Colt knew it. The reminder came 2 weeks later when a stranger rode into Iron Mesa just after dawn. Colt was working with Tommy to repair fence line when he saw the rider approaching, alone, moving cautiously, with the look of someone who'd traveled hard and wasn't sure of his welcome. Colt set down his tools and walked to meet the man at the edge of the property, his hand resting easy on his pistol. Help you with something? The stranger was young, maybe 25, with a face that carried the kind of hard miles that aged you faster than years. He stopped his horse and raised both hands to show they were empty. Name's Caleb Monroe. I rode with Silas's crew for about 3 months before everything went south. He spoke quickly, nervous. I know you got no reason to trust me, but I came here to tell you something important. I'm listening. There's talk down in the border towns. Some of Silas's men who got away are planning revenge. They're saying the valley got too big for its britches, that someone needs to put you down to show people what happens when they stand up against their betters. Colt's eyes narrowed. How many men? Maybe 5 or 6. Not enough for a full assault, but enough to do damage if they catch you off guard. Caleb swallowed hard. I'm telling you because I didn't sign up to hurt innocent people. I needed work, and Silas paid well, but what we did, wasn't right. I can't change the past, but I can at least warn you about what's coming. Why should I believe you? Because I got nothing to gain by lying. I could have just ridden past, kept my mouth shut, and let whatever happens happen. But I've been running from my conscience for 3 months, and I'm tired of it. Caleb's voice cracked. I just want to do one decent thing before I disappear for good. Colt studied the young man and saw genuine remorse in his eyes. He'd met plenty of liars in his time. They had a particular way of looking everywhere except directly at you. Caleb met his gaze straight on. Who's leading this group? A man named Pike Dennison. He was Silas's go-between with some of the more ruthless operations. Cold-blooded killer, smart, and he's got a personal grudge now because his brother died in the fight here. Colt knew the name. Dennison had been mentioned in several testimonies during the trials, but had vanished before Captain Morrison's men could arrest him. If he was gathering what remained of Silas's crew, it meant the threat wasn't over. When are they coming? I don't know exactly. Could be a week, could be a month, but they're coming. Caleb gathered his reins. That's all I know. Do with it what you will. You got a place to go? Colt asked. The question seemed to surprise Caleb. I'll figure something out. You want to make amends for what you did? There's work here. Honest work, fair pay. You'd be under watch until you proved yourself, but it's a chance to start over. Caleb stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. You'd give me work? After everything? Everyone deserves a second chance if they're willing to earn it, Colt said. But you cross us, you run, you bring trouble down on these people, and I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. We clear? Clear. Caleb dismounted, and there was something like hope in his face. Thank you. I won't let you down. Tommy had been watching from a distance, and as Caleb led his horse toward the barn, the young man approached Colt with obvious skepticism. You sure that's smart? Trusting one of Silas's men? I'm not sure of anything, Colt admitted. But if we don't give people a chance to change, we're no better than the men we fought against. He took Caleb's warning seriously, though. That evening, he rode to Black Pine Ranch to talk with Samuel and Jacob. They gathered around the dining table while Samuel's wife served coffee, and Colt laid out what he'd learned. Dennison's smart enough to know he can't take us head on, Colt said, so he'll try something else. Ambush, maybe. Or targeting us individually when we're vulnerable. Jacob, now wearing his marshal's badge with growing confidence, leaned forward. We could organize patrols, make sure no one's traveling alone. Good start, Colt agreed, but we also need to smoke them out. Force them to make their move on our terms instead of theirs. How? Samuel asked. Colt thought about it, turning the problem over in his mind like examining a rock for weak points. We make ourselves look vulnerable. Set a trap. Over the next few days, they put the plan together. Word was quietly spread through the valley that Colt would be traveling to the territorial capital in 3 weeks to testify in additional hearings against Silas's associates. The trip would require him to cross through isolated country, perfect for an ambush. They made sure the information reached the saloons and trading posts where loose talk flowed freely. Then they waited. The trap was sprung on a cold morning 2 weeks later. Colt rode out from Iron Mesa before dawn, supposedly alone, heading toward the mountain pass that led to the territorial road. In reality, Jacob and 5 deputized men were shadowing him from the ridges, staying just out of sight but close enough to respond if needed. Colt felt them before he saw them, that prickle at the back of his neck that came from being watched by hostile eyes. He was halfway through the pass when they appeared, 5 riders blocking the trail ahead, while 2 more closed in from behind. Pike Dennison sat his horse at the center, a broad man with a scarred face and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. Colt Varren, heard a lot about you. Wish I could say the same, Colt replied, his hands easy on the reins but ready to move. You're Pike Dennison, Silas Red's errand boy. Dennison's face darkened. I was his partner, and you killed my brother. Your brother died attacking innocent people. That's not murder, that's consequence. You got a smart mouth for a dead man. Dennison drew his pistol, and the other riders followed suit. Should have taken Voss's offer and left when you had the chance. Now you're going to die in this pass, and no one's going to know what happened to you. I wouldn't count on that, Colt said calmly. At that moment, Jacob and his deputies appeared on the ridges above, rifles trained on Dennison's men. The trap had worked perfectly. You're surrounded, Jacob called down. Drop your weapons and surrender or we will fire. For a moment, everything hung in balance. Colt could see Dennison calculating odds, weighing whether to go down fighting or accept defeat. The men with him looked nervous, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Then one of Dennison's riders made the choice for all of them. He wheeled his horse and tried to flee back down the pass. Jacob's deputies fired, not to kill, but to stop, and the man's horse stumbled, throwing him. The others immediately dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Only Dennison hesitated, his gun still pointed at Colt. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Colt said quietly. Silas is in prison. His empire's broken. And you're about to join him. Let it go, Pike. Let it end here. For a moment, Colt thought Dennison might pull the trigger anyway, might choose death over surrender. But then something in the man's face crumbled and he lowered his gun. I should have stayed in Texas, Dennison muttered as Jacob's men came down to take him into custody. The capture of Pike Dennison and his crew marked the end of Silas Red's influence in the valley. With the last of his enforcers either imprisoned or scattered, the threat finally truly lifted. The valley could breathe again. The trials concluded in early December, with Dennison receiving 15 years for conspiracy and attempted murder. The territorial governor, impressed by how Red Hollow had cleaned up corruption, granted the town a charter for self-governance and promised funding for a proper courthouse and jail. It was, by any measure, a victory. But as Colt stood in the town square watching workers begin construction on the new courthouse, he felt something unsettled in his chest. There was still one piece of unfinished business, one ghost he hadn't laid to rest. Deke Holloway. That night, Colt sat in the main house at Iron Mesa with Elias, nursing a whiskey and watching the fire. The older man had mostly recovered from his injuries, though he still moved carefully and tired more easily than before. You're thinking about him, Elias said. It wasn't a question. I am. You going after him? Colt took a long drink, feeling the burn. I don't know. Part of me says I have to, for my brother, for justice. But another part says maybe some debts don't need collecting. Maybe some fights aren't worth finishing. Elias was quiet for a long moment. I think you already know what you're going to do. You're just working up to admitting it. Yeah? Colt looked at him. What do you think I've decided? I think you've decided that revenge won't bring your brother back, that killing Holloway won't change what happened or heal the wound. And I think you found something here that matters more than settling an old score. Elias met his gaze steadily. But I also think you need to face him one last time, not to kill him, but to prove to yourself that you're choosing to let it go. Colt absorbed this, recognizing the truth in it. You're a wise man, Elias Crowe. I'm an old man who's made enough mistakes to recognize wisdom when I stumble over it. Elias smiled. You want my advice? Go find Holloway. Look him in the eye, and then make your choice with full knowledge of what it means. 3 days later, Colt rode south. He left Tommy in charge of the ranch work and Jacob in charge of keeping the peace. He didn't tell anyone except Elias and Elena where he was going or why. Elena had caught him preparing to leave and stood in the barn doorway, her arms crossed. How long will you be gone? A week, maybe 2. And if you don't come back? Colt checked Ash's saddle, making sure everything was secure. Then my half of Iron Mesa goes to you and Elias to do with as you see fit. It's all in writing with Henry at the land office. That's not what I meant, Elena said quietly. He turned to face her. Over the past months, something had developed between them, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than shared trauma. They hadn't spoken of it directly, both too busy with rebuilding to examine what was growing, but it was there nonetheless. I'm coming back, Colt said. This isn't about dying, it's about living with myself. Elena stepped closer. Then make sure you do. Come back, I mean. Because this valley needs you, and... She hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. I need you. Colt felt something shift in his chest, warm and solid. I'll come back. That's a promise. The ride to the border took 5 days through country that grew progressively rougher and more lawless. Colt crossed into Mexico at a small trading post where money spoke louder than questions, and he followed the dusty road to San Miguel. The town was exactly what he expected: small, poor, clinging to survival in harsh country. He found Deke Holloway in a cantina at the edge of town, drinking cheap tequila and looking 20 years older than the last time Colt had seen him. Holloway recognized him immediately. His hand went to his gun, but Colt shook his head. I'm not here to kill you, Deke. Then what do you want? Holloway's voice was rough, scared. Colt sat down across from him. I want to understand. My brother was a good man. He didn't cheat at cards, didn't start fights, so why'd you shoot him? Holloway stared into his glass. Because I was drunk. Because I was losing and he was winning, and I got it in my head he must be cheating. So I called him out, and when he stood up, He trailed off, his hands shaking. I've been running ever since, can't sleep. Can't stop seeing his face. Good, Colt said flatly. You should see it. You should remember what you took from the world. So what now? You going to make it right by putting a bullet in me? Colt thought about it. Thought about his brother, about the years of anger and hunting, about the man he'd been when he rode into Red Hollow and the man he'd become since. Killing Holloway would be easy. Simple. The ending to a story that had defined him for so long. But it wouldn't bring his brother back. Wouldn't undo the past. Wouldn't change the fact that Colt had found something worth living for beyond revenge. No, Colt said finally. I'm not going to kill you, but you're going to do something for me. What? You're going to live with what you did, every day for the rest of your life. You're going to carry that weight and let it make you into someone better, or it's going to destroy you. Either way, that's your burden to bear, not mine. He stood and dropped a few coins on the table. My brother's name was Daniel Varren. Remember it. Remember you took him from people who loved him. And if I ever hear you've killed another man in a card game or any other pointless way, I'll come back and finish this. We clear? Holloway nodded, tears streaking down his weathered face. Clear. Colt walked out of the cantina and didn't look back. He rode north toward the border, and with each mile, he felt the weight he'd been carrying begin to lift. It wasn't forgiveness. He didn't think he'd ever truly forgive Deke Holloway, but it was release. A choice to stop letting the past define his future. He crossed back into the territory 2 days later and turned ash toward home. The valley had never looked more beautiful. Snow dusted the mountain peaks, and the grasslands stretched golden under winter sun. As Iron Mesa came into view, Colt saw smoke rising from the chimneys and figures moving around the property. Tommy and Caleb working on the new barn extension, Elias directing from the porch. Elena was there too, sitting on the porch steps with a notebook, probably working on her next editorial. She looked up when she heard hoofbeats and stood, shading her eyes against the sun. Colt dismounted and walked to meet her, and without words, she knew. Knew he'd found Holloway, knew he'd let him live, knew he'd chosen a different path. Welcome home, she said simply. It's good to be back. That evening, after the work was done and supper was finished, Colt stood on the porch with Elias watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of amber and rose. The older man had a cigar, something the doctor had told him not to smoke, but he did anyway when he thought he'd earned it. You made peace with your ghosts? Elias asked. As much peace as I'm likely to get, Colt replied. Turns out revenge is overrated. Most things people kill for are, Elias observed. He blew smoke into the evening air. You know what's not overrated? Building something that lasts, something that means more than just you. Colt looked at the land stretching before them. Land he now owned, land he'd fought to protect, land he'd helped build into something future generations would inherit. I'm starting to understand that. Good, because I've been thinking. Elias turned to face him. I'm getting old, Colt. Oh, I'm not dying tomorrow or anything dramatic like that. But my fighting days are behind me. This ranch needs someone young enough to run it for the next 30 years. Someone who understands that owning land means being responsible to it and the people who depend on it. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to make it official. Change that transfer from half ownership to full partnership. Equal say in all decisions, equal responsibility. This place should be as much yours as mine. Colt was quiet, feeling the magnitude of what was being offered. It wasn't just land or wealth, it was belonging. It was the thing he'd been searching for without knowing it through all his years of drifting. I accept, he said, on one condition. Name it. When you do die, years from now, after we've both gotten old and ornery, this place doesn't just go to me. Part of it endows a school. Part of it goes to the town for public land. We build something that outlasts both of us. Elias's eyes shone with approval. Now you're thinking like a real landowner. Deal. They shook on it as the sun completed its descent and the first stars emerged. Inside the house, lamps were being lit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was always more work, more problems to solve, more threats to guard against. But tonight, for the first time in longer than Colt could remember, he felt settled. Winter passed into spring, and the valley transformed. The new courthouse opened with Judge Cartwright presiding over a circuit that now included regular visits to ensure justice was maintained. Jacob proved to be an excellent marshal, tough when needed, but fair always. Crime dropped not because people were afraid of punishment, but because they finally had something to protect and a system they trusted. Elena's newspaper became required reading, her editorials shaping public opinion and holding officials accountable. She expanded to cover the entire territory, and other papers began reprinting her work. The Valley Voice became synonymous with truth and integrity. Samuel Garrett and other ranchers formed a cattlemen's association that prevented the kind of predatory land-grabbing Silas had pioneered. They established fair prices, ethical practices, and mutual support systems. The valley began to prosper in ways that benefited everyone, not just a powerful few. And Colt found himself in the middle of it all, not as a gunfighter or a drifter, but as a builder. He and Elias expanded Iron Mesa's operations, but they did it fairly, paying good wages, treating workers with respect, investing in the community. Other ranchers followed their example, and a new culture began to take root. On a warm day in late May, Colt was working with Tommy to break a new horse when Elena rode up to the ranch with news that made her eyes bright with excitement. The territorial governor is coming to Red Hollow, she announced. He wants to hold a public ceremony recognizing the valley's transformation. He's calling it a model for frontier governance. Elias, who'd been watching the horse training, chuckled. Bet he'll take credit for it, too. Probably, Elena agreed. But it also means official recognition, resources, protection. Everything we've built will have the weight of territorial law behind it. The ceremony was held 2 weeks later in the town square, with what seemed like the entire population of Red Hollow and the surrounding ranches in attendance. The governor gave a speech about courage and civic duty, and while he did indeed take some credit, he also singled out specific people. Elias for refusing to surrender his land, Elena for exposing the truth, Jacob for maintaining order, and Colt for standing up when others were afraid. Colt stood through the recognition feeling uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its importance. These people needed heroes, needed to see that ordinary citizens could make extraordinary differences. If being held up as an example helped others find their courage, he could endure the discomfort. After the ceremony, as people celebrated with food and music, Colt found himself standing with Elena at the edge of the crowd. She'd been watching him throughout the governor's speech, and now she smiled. "You hate this, don't you? Being praised." "I'm not good with crowds," Colt admitted. "You were good with them when you were rallying them to fight Silas. That was different. That was necessity." Elena laughed, and the sound made something warm bloom in Colt's chest. Over the months, that connection between them had deepened, growing from respect to friendship to something neither of them had quite named yet. "Walk with me?" Elena asked. They left the celebration and walked toward the edge of town, where the grasslands stretched endlessly toward the mountains. The evening was beautiful, the air sweet with the scent of wildflowers and new grass. "I've been thinking about the future," Elena said. "About what I want my life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I realized that all my plans, all my dreams for the newspaper and the valley and making my father's legacy mean something. They all include you." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I know we've never talked about this directly. We've both been too busy, too focused on survival and rebuilding. But Colt, I need to know if what I'm feeling is..." She hesitated, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen her. "Is it just me?" Colt looked at her. This fierce, brilliant woman who'd fought beside him, who'd risked everything for truth, who'd become the heart of this community's transformation. He thought about the future he'd been slowly building in his mind, the life he wanted to create now that revenge no longer defined him. Every version of that future included her. "It's not just you," he said quietly. "It hasn't been for a while." Elena's smile could have lit the valley. "Then maybe we should stop pretending we're just friends and colleagues." "Maybe we should," Colt agreed. He kissed her as the sun set behind them, and it felt like coming home in a way that transcended geography. This wasn't just about finding a place to stay. It was about finding someone to build a life with, someone who understood both who he'd been and who he was becoming. The summer brought new challenges and new growth. A schoolhouse was built, with Elena serving on the board. A proper bank opened, managed by honest men under strict oversight. The railroad announced plans to extend a line through the valley, bringing both opportunity and the need for careful regulation to prevent another Silas Red from exploiting it. Through it all, Colt worked alongside Elias to make Iron Mesa a model of what a frontier ranch could be. They hired fairly, paid well, and invested profits back into improvements that benefited everyone. Tommy grew into a skilled ranch hand and eventually a foreman. Caleb proved his redemption was genuine, becoming one of their most trusted workers. As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Colt and Elena were married in a simple ceremony at Iron Mesa, surrounded by the community they'd helped save and rebuild. Elias stood as Colt's witness, tears in his eyes that he pretended were from the wind. Samuel and Jacob were there, along with what felt like half the territory. The celebration lasted into the night, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from people who've survived darkness and found light. As Colt danced with his wife under the stars, he thought about the long road that had brought him here. The pain, the loss, the years of drifting, the moment he'd chosen to stay instead of run. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "How strange life is," Colt replied. "I came here hunting a killer, planning to move on as soon as I found him. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Do you regret it? Giving up the chase?" "Not for a second." He pulled back to look at her. "I thought revenge would give me peace. Turns out building something real with people I care about, that's what peace actually feels like." Elena kissed him. "I love you, Colt Varren." "I love you too." The years that followed proved what Colt and Elias and all the others had fought to create. The valley became known throughout the territory as a place where law meant something, where corruption couldn't take root, where ordinary people had extraordinary power to shape their own destiny. Jacob served as marshal for 12 years before becoming territorial judge, carrying on the work his grandfather and father had started. The newspaper Elena ran became one of the most respected publications in the West, training young journalists who went on to expose corruption in other territories. Iron Mesa prospered under the partnership of Colt and Elias, and when Elias finally passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, the funeral drew people from across the territory. Ranchers and farmers, merchants and miners, everyone who'd benefited from his stubborn refusal to surrender his principles. Colt kept his promise. Part of the ranch was endowed for a school that would provide free education to children regardless of their family's wealth. Part became public land, preserved for future generations. And the working portion of Iron Mesa continued under Colt's management, growing and adapting while maintaining the values that had defined it from the start. On a morning 20 years after first riding into Red Hollow, Colt stood on the porch of his home watching his and Elena's 2 children playing in the yard. His daughter was teaching his son to ride, both of them laughing as the pony trotted in circles. Elena emerged from the house with coffee, her hair now streaked with gray, but her eyes still fierce and bright. She handed him a cup and stood beside him, and they watched their children in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been if you'd ridden past Red Hollow that day?" Elena asked. Colt considered it. "Sometimes. I think about Deke Holloway, about whether I would have caught up to him, what would have happened if I had. But honestly, I can't imagine a version of my life better than this one. Even with all the fighting, the fear, the close calls, especially because of those things." He looked at her. "Everything worth having requires fighting for. You taught me that. This valley taught me that. And I'm grateful every day that I was stubborn enough to stay and see it through." Elena leaned against him, and they watched the sun climb higher illuminating the valley they'd helped save and the future they'd helped build. The land stretched before them, worked and loved and protected, a testament to the truth that courage and conviction could overcome greed and fear. Somewhere in the distance, cattle grazed on grassland that would feed families throughout the territory. In town, Elena's newspaper was being printed, carrying stories of justice and accountability. In the courthouse, honest judges were hearing cases under laws that meant something. And in homes throughout the valley, people lived without fear, raising their children in a place where right mattered more than might. It wasn't perfect. There would always be challenges, always be new threats to guard against, always be work to do. But it was real. It was worth protecting. And it was home. Colt Varren had come to this valley as a drifter seeking revenge. He stayed as a fighter defending the innocent. And he'd become something he never expected, a builder of futures, a protector of hope, a man whose legacy would outlast his lifetime. The Iron Mesa War had been won not through greater violence, but through greater courage. Not by defeating enemies, but by transforming victims into citizens, fear into strength, silence into voice. And in that transformation, Colt had found something more valuable than any revenge could ever provide. He'd found purpose. He'd found love. He'd found home. And on this beautiful morning, watching his children play on land that would be theirs to protect and pass on, Colt Varren knew he'd made the right choice when he decided to stay and fight for a valley that needed him. The frontier was still wild, still dangerous, still full of men who took what they wanted through force and deception. But here, in this valley, on this land, a different story was being written, one where ordinary people could stand together and build something extraordinary. And that story would continue long after Colt Varren was gone, carried forward by children who'd never known fear because their parents had found the courage to fight back, by communities that understood the price of freedom and were willing to pay it, by a culture that valued truth and justice over comfort and convenience. It was, Colt thought as Elena called the children in for breakfast, a legacy worth leaving. The sun continued its climb, painting the valley in gold light, and Colt Varren, former drifter, gunfighter, and man of justice, smiled at the life he'd built and the future he'd helped create. He was home, and he was exactly where he was meant to be.